tell me about this drum part. Like, what was the first part of this you wrote?
What was the first part I wrote? Yeah. Usually when I'm making drum beats, I usually start with kick and snare and try and come up with like a clave for that. And then I start adding other components.
So was it this part?
Yeah, yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
And whose idea was it to play the one-andas over the bar line with the brush? Was that Nate's innovation, or was that something that you came up with too?
Yeah, where he's kind of going.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
So sick.
That's still me, but you know, working with Nate all of these years, it's me, and then I give him like the concept, and then he's able to just take it and then put it through his Nate, you know, brain plug-in and extrapolate something more beautiful. But basically, if you were to ask him like what is a classic Wendel beat, it's like that there's something anchoring the beat, and then there's something that's really going over the bar line, or it actually takes quite a while to cycle back to the beginning. So even that brush thing, it was like, okay, we're in 9, but he's going to imply some kind of straight 4 thing in the right hand. Yeah.
Was the drum clave in the DNA of the original thing? So like, even as you're thinking about the piano ostinato,
Yeah.
are you kind of like ba 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 ba?
Totally. Yeah, because probably, I don't remember anymore. It's been so many years, but I probably, that song started with that clave, and maybe that bass line, maybe, you know. So yeah. So it's sort of like, I'm sure I was actually naturally doing mouth percussion that kind of was grabbing those anticipations. And then, built the clave out of it. Yeah.
One of the most interesting and captivating parts to me is there's sort of 2 major sections. So there's the initial bit before that bass line comes in with the bass doubling the left hand in the keyboard, and at some point Nate sort of switches back and forth. So like there's the intro, there's the bass solo, and then the soprano solo starts, and then Nate goes to the ride cymbal and starts catching more of the keyboard left hand figures. How much of that was thought through on your part, and how much of that was just you handed Nate the whole package and said, make of this what you will?
Yeah, like on that tune, yeah, once we arrive, it's like quote unquote the full parts. Yeah, we were just talking a lot about how to overlap things. And, you know, again, I'm very spoiled having someone like Nate who can kind of do drum machine like layering with his limbs, but then add this looseness to it, you know. So we already had this clave, we already had this thing that was kind of implying a 4, and then, which I like to do a lot of the time on drum beats, is then it was like, okay, let's add one more factor to really smear this thing and make it just seem, make it more difficult to kind of get a sense of where one is, you know. And that's, so when the full beat comes in, him adding the dotted quarter notes in the hi-hat was that moment, you know. But then in terms of him, yeah, like, I think initially the idea was like when he played the beat clean initially, and we were kind of working it out. Yeah, the ride was like these kind of straight half notes in 4.
So
Yeah.
It's the same pattern the brush was playing.
Totally.
Except transposed to the bell. Yeah.
Totally. So you kind of have this implied 4 thing, you have this dotted quarter note thing, and then and even the original clave, it's like, it's the same distance between the kick and the snare, but then you've got this extra beat to deal with.
Right.
But if you were to straighten it out, it would be a straight beat.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
The dotted is, I don't know how it's notated, but it's either dotted eighths or dotted quarters that Nate plays in the left foot. Maybe I'll just demo this really quickly.
Yeah. So these are, the way I notated this was, these are the quarters.
Those are the quarters, so those would have been dotted quarters.
Go. Yeah, totally. And,
I'll tell you how that strikes me. So when I was first learning this in a practice room in like 2013 or 2014, because Frame came out and I was instantly like, fuck, time to shut all this. I was thinking, well, what an elegant way to have a continuous hat pattern in 9, essentially.
Yeah.
Like, because you could do quarters, that would feel a little more urgent, a little more choppy. That would be most people's instincts. But the dotted quarter it also gave it this dance. And I'll say, like, what Nate did is more difficult too, because I think he's practiced the dotted quarter in more different places. So it's like my instinct is like, I'll start both feet together, like a son clave, right? And then we're off to the races. I'm cool.
Right.
But Nate's whole thing was he starts it on the offbeat.
Right. That part was Nate. I'm pretty sure I wouldn't have come up with that, you know. Although we've done other beats together where definitely it's been a deliberate thing to make it an off. But no, that's Nate. That's Nate for sure.
When I was cramming this last night, I was like, nope, that's not gonna happen.
It's like
I will do the low rent version of this.
Yeah, you know, I mean, for me, Nate, like as we were talking, you know, like I'm literally just like this drum kit I just got a few months ago. Like I'm really just embarking on the super fun journey of having an amateur love affair with drums. And, you know, I've started actually for the first time. Now I have the opportunity to learn the beats that I made other drummers play, and it's so much fun. But then it really hits me. Like a beat like this, you know, that's going to take me so much time to be able to play that at half the speed you're doing it. And there is no way in hell that I would be able to add any permutations, you know, in my current state that wouldn't just send me right off the rails, you know. So I do find that fascinating. I find that drummer part really fascinating. I do wonder, like, for you, is it like how much of it is conscious thought, how much of it is like limbs, muscle memory, chugging along to the point where then you just get into this flow state, and then you can add information that doesn't throw you off the tracks.
I don't want to be white knuckling anything in a performance.
Yeah.
So if I've got a rehearsal or a gig, which I don't much anymore, but back in the day when I used to, I would want whatever I play to be something that's under my hands so that I can just fully listen. And I think one thing that makes Nate unique is that he just has a lot more capacity to have more things in the black box at the subconscious level and still have bandwidth. But I probably would have needed a week of practice every day to make everything that he does on this intuitive. And my instinct was, I want to have something going on underneath that's easy enough that like I can respond to what a soloist is doing, and I can make reference to those bass lines the way Nate does.
Totally. Man, well, yeah, it's funny, like it's been so long, so it's really fun to revisit these tunes and hear your perspective on it, because, you know, at this point I don't even remember the original conversations, if you will, you know, and how it all came about. So it's fun to go down memory lane.
Well, that was going to be what I wanted to ask. Like my sort of last question over this was just, I feel like it was evocative of something, but I couldn't put my finger on what. But I'm like, that whole album, the whole Frame album, I was just like, oh, this this is like what's been missing. It almost felt like a missing link in jazz fusion. So I'm wondering, like, if you're able to talk about maybe some of the ambient things that were clanging around in your head when you were writing these songs that might have inspired some of the stuff that popped out.
Man, I honestly, if I tried to give you a nutshell answer, I honestly think it's mostly about people's individual upbringing paths, you know. So in my case, if you knew what I grew up on, then it would make perfect sense. So what literally, like, my diet growing up was an opera singing mom and a ton of classical music in the household, me playing bassoon in orchestras and kind of that whole aspect happening. So not only like romantic classical era, but modern classical chamber era.
Right.
There was that. There was this radio station. I don't think it's around anymore. It was an AM station. It was called K-Day, and it played 24-hour commercial-free hip-hop. And I was just obsessed with that station. I had it on all the time.
No kidding.
Yeah, I loved it. You know,
so, like, what were a couple of things that you're into? Like De La Soul,
Yeah.
Tribe Called Quest?
Tribe Called Quest, Black Star.
Oh, hell yeah.
You know, just that era of hip hop. And then I had a neighbor that was a insane jazzophile, and he was just handing me Duke Ellington, Coltrane, Parker. So, you know, like they say, I have this vague memory of watching, like, maybe it was an Adam Neely video about, like, that there's a particular cognitive range, like from age, I don't know what it is, 10 to 14 or 11, where, like, basically anything that you absorb during that time kind of becomes your
Oeuvre.
Yeah, it kind of becomes your template, you know, maybe even food. That's like your favorite era or taste, you know, but
I've heard that about movies too.
yeah. You know, so basically if you were to mash those things together, that's kind of what I like to hear in music. So beats that sort of speak to programming and drum machines, you know, harmony and writing that kind of speaks to what we might call the through composed classical aesthetic. But then production that's more of the era of the music that we grew up listening to, Radiohead, the early eras of EDM. So, like, don't be afraid of delays and distortion and Fender Rhodes through pedals, you know. So if you were to blend all those things together, that's kind of the stuff I was writing at the time and still write, you know. But definitely, I'm kind of getting to an answer here. Definitely, I certainly wasn't thinking about, you know, what's missing or you know, ultimately I think that what's so cool about instrumental music, and particularly this music, is that it just allows room for you to just be an individual. And the more you can do that, then the more it sounds like something potentially innovative, but I don't think it's innovation. I think it's just individual taste just being expressed through music. So
100%. Yeah. Frame doesn't feel like a cerebral approach to things. It doesn't feel like anyone said, like, I'm consciously trying to innovate. That's
yeah.
And I would say a similar thing about, like, maybe Glasper's Black Radio or something.
Totally.
Right. It just feels like somebody absorbed a bunch of stuff and then just played something from their instincts, and that's what causes a really mature fusion.
Yeah, and an expression of love of the things. You're just giving it up. You're not saying I did this. It's just like, yeah, this is what I love, you know. So, you know, I think that just goes for all the artists that we love, you know. So I'm all that to say, thank you for your kind words and about that album. And, you know, I just remember, I just have such great memories of making that album, you know, that band with Tigran and Nate and Adam Benjamin, Gerald Clayton. I mean, we had such a fun time. And
Ben Street. And somehow it was like all this, yeah, at the time it was like kind of this crazy conceptual music, but everybody, I don't know, we were like-minded, and we found a way to just become this nice amoeba. Yeah, it was great. Well, on that note, want to talk about Backbow? Is that extra hard when the left foot hats go away?
Oh my God, so much. And yeah, and it's like the whole challenge of playing that tune. I remember that I remember when we were working on it, especially because Tigran got a solo on that one. Yeah, it was just this idea of the whole thing is triplet based, right? Obviously. But then once you start doing those displaced triplets, it's really at that tempo where you can stretch it to 16ths. And just holding on to that left hand, that bass movement, and somehow stretching time in that way. That was like the whole game, you know. And even for Tigran, like he would really, I have memories of us, playing that tune, and he was really going for it, like really trying to see how far he could push those limits, you know. And I remember his whole thing was like he really wanted to just keep that anchored triplet thing in his left hand and not let go of that, and then just do permutation upon permutation in his right hand and really hold both. And it was so much fun. Yeah.
There was a Gerald Clayton solo on this. I'm going to expose my degree of nerdiness, but when you guys were on the checkout, you had Gerald in the studio. I don't know what happened to that recording. I would kill for that bootleg, but Gerald's solo was like really unique and interesting too in a different way.
Wow.
Do you remember that?
No, not at all. Wow.
Yeah.
He played on that too, deep. That's amazing. I want to hear that. Yeah. I'm sure it was a different direction.
I wonder if NPR has that in a basement somewhere.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, it's true. That used to be somewhere online. Yeah, it's kind of gone now. Yeah.
Yeah. It's tough to find. Well, let's talk about the beat.
Yeah.
So I think what's the continuity throughout this, and it's actually the same as Frame, is the offset. So the clave, it's a 9, so it's like so my instinct, as I was telling you earlier, if someone put this in front of me, is I'll just be like,
right.
But the beat's got this wonderful offset. So and it like takes a little mental energy to think of it. So I actually came up with this. Actually, I don't know if I uniquely came up with this. It might be Nate was doing this too, and it's kind of like a drummer thing. But if I put a couple of ghost notes on the hat, I can make physical the division of time. So what that means is, so I can have the kick drum doing that, and I just know two right hand notes and a left hand note. But then that offset reoccurs in the solo section, which is in 5. So. Yeah, it adds so much more funkiness, particularly in the solo section, and then in the studio version when Nate like removes all reference to the beat and just like super funky. But I'm assuming that whole offset was written into the DNA of the beat, like from conception.
Totally.
And yeah, like how do you think of that shit?
I mean, you know, man, it's funny. Nate's the one that said it, because I you know, in Kneebody and then all the projects we've done together, very often I do bring in beats. I bring in beat concepts, and he's just like, huh? You know, like he's in it, but he loves it because he's just like, yeah, because you don't play drums, you're just not thinking about. You're just not coming from that perspective, and so, you know, ironically, gosh, you know, come to think of it, I hope me starting to learn the drums doesn't doesn't iron that weirdness out, but yeah, but you know, I don't know how I think about it, man. I think it's honestly, if I was to guess, it's just I love the idea of layers. That's it. So I like if everything is playing the same rhythm, like if you've got harmony, melody, and rhythm, and everybody's on the same, kind of playing the same thing, then I think of that as a one-dimensional feeling. And then the more you can kind of create micro and macro views of the music, then the more, to me, it feels like it gets wider and it gets more 2 or 3 dimensional. So yeah, when I think about the drums, I'm thinking about like, well, those downbeats are covered in the bass line, so we don't need it in the drums per se, unless it's just really hard to play. I mean, this tune is really hard to play. It's like hilarious trying to, whatever, 10 years later, trying to play this on keyboard, and I can't even barely play, playing it with you, it makes me realize this is very hard, and I find myself stomping my foot to give myself downbeats, but to feel the downbeats, but to not actually literally play them is what makes it sound cool in my mind. It's implied, but it's not there.
Yeah.
So yeah, I have no idea how or why I came up with that beat, but I know philosophically, I know why I made that choice.
That's interesting. It makes me think about African music and Afro-Cuban music and stuff like Bembe and Bata.
Totally.
Where it's really polyphonic and you have various percussionists playing parts that don't necessarily overlap, or they overlap slightly, but they also play in the spaces that the other instruments leave. And I know the origin story of this has something to do with that. It's named after a person, and I forget the person's name, but maybe you can
I'm
remind
so glad
me.
you brought that up. Yeah, Malem Mustafa Bakbo, who is just like ripping Ghanaian player that actually that was on a Tigran tour. We played in Essaouira. They have a world festival there, and we got to play with the local badasses, right? And here is Malem playing on this thing called the gimbri, and which is like a kind of a 3-note bass guitar is the closest thing I would approximate it to. And then I can't remember the name, but basically it's him, and he's singing. He kind of leads the music through his voice and calls, and then everybody else has these percussion instruments that they hold in their hands that like they remind me of castanets. I'm really bad that I can't remember right now, but basically like the experience of playing with him. Actually, and the person that books that festival is a guy named Karim Ziad, who's a ridiculous drummer and has been able to somehow find a way to take that language and get it onto the drum kit. But yeah, I was thinking about him a lot when I wrote this, and just how they're able to do rhythms that literally cannot be notated. Like there's just no way. They play rhythms and time that does exist in that gray zone between triplet and straight 16th, and between like rushing and dragging, but actually never rushing or dragging, like bar to bar, phrase to phrase, and it's so deep, it's so powerful. So yeah, thank you for reminding me of that. Like, yeah, I've that he was the inspiration for that, and ultimately. Anytime you have a incredibly intense cultural experience like that, you're just getting a taste. You're just scratching the surface. So it's really an inspired by. It's a love letter to that experience.
When you think about it, okay, so I've got a concept that's forming from this jumping off point. So human music that evolves beyond rhythmic structures. So a European analogy might be Chopin, or like the way people interpret Chopin, where it's like it's written a certain way on the page, but there's like rubato to it, and it's something that has to sort of be learned and emulated. Like you don't just read what's on the page mechanically. You study with the teacher, and those traditions are sort of handed down, and it makes me think of this very human tendency to tinker with stuff, and maybe to slightly get bored and to look for nuance, but also to perfect things. And there's like, I'm sure you've heard of this, but the Japanese concept of kaizen. So it's like when your only language is rhythm and when your instruments are simple, you're probably looking for more degrees of freedom and like, just like, you know how it is when groups of badass musicians get together and shed, like there probably some of these innovations happen as people are like, oh damn, what that dude did was funky. Like I need to go into the shed this week and figure that out. And that's how it evolves, maybe.
Yeah, and I do think about that. Like it's really a cool experience to go down memory lane with you, because in a way you're asking questions that are, and I think this happens a lot in music. There's so many decisions and rules that are created subconsciously through not thinking, but through the experience of playing together, both from generation to generation and from day to day. And that's where the magic is. Like that's the stuff we can't get down on the page. And it's sort of lost to time in terms of like, well, how did we get there? And it's beautiful that we can't remember, because maybe even at the time we didn't know, you know, so yeah.
There's more going on in these meat processors than we can access consciously. I don't think that's controversial. That's not even woo.
Yeah.
But I think improvisational music is like kind of at the cutting edge of understanding what the human brain can do, because we're sort of just like pumping all these influences into a black box, and we kind of know like how to prime it through shedding, but ultimately it's sort of just like press record and trust that this thing's going to do its thing.
Totally.
And there's so much human creation that works that way, where it's like we, the sort of conscious operators of our minds, don't really even understand what's happening, but we just know that if we cram enough stuff in, like eventually good things will seep out if we trust our instincts.
Yeah, and to me the thing I always think about is just this feeling of just try not to blink, basically. Really, you know, every time I've been in so many situations where I step into a studio and I know we're all going to create together, and it's really clear that we don't quite know what's going to happen. And the worst thing you can do in that moment is get scared.
Right.
You know, and then suddenly 10 hours pass and you've done it. And then and always, inevitably, you're just like, well, how did that happen? What happened? You know?
And trying to pre-plan it would almost be like interfering with the vibe.
Well, I guess the pre-planning is the shedding.
Right.
Shedding so much that you forget, which is kind of why I was asking you, but like when you're playing these beats, if there is that element to it, if you have all the time in the world and you're playing these weird layered beats, is the ultimate goal to just kind of have this weird subconscious muscle memory kind of rolling so that you can kind of split your mind in two and kind of dance while your limbs just kind of take care of business, you know?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I assume it's similar to playing the horn, but there's a feeling of like, it's a similar feeling to hearing a cool recording and like wanting to dance, except you're creating that.
Yeah.
So like when it's working, when the flow's working, it should feel like just jamming along with yourself, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. That's cool.
Sweet. Well, should we talk about drum battle?
Okay.
And then that segues into the part that I can't do yet. The Nate's absolutely inhuman. Yeah. So that's a good segue into what made this tune so difficult for me. And this is one that's like, this is like a recital piece. I think for the average drummer, you look at this and you're like, okay, like I need 2 months worth of practice. And the very first thing, actually back in the day when the record came out and I was like, oh, I need to get this in my mental. What I was doing was I was practicing clapping da-da, 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 as I was trying to sing the melody.
Totally.
As I was like driving in my car, and I kind of just barely got that. But the next stage would have been to have that in my head and also the 9/4. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 with the but cycling over it, just completely inculcated, and then just be able to improvise freely. And that would have required quite a bit more effort. But yeah, like, what's the origin story? I mean, we can take this section by section, but for that particular part, the 9/4 with those dotted rhythms over the top of that, like, yeah, how did you come up with that?
Yeah, that one is like, I basically, when I'm writing, I try and take the least amount of information possible and try and create the most variations out of that piece of information. So literally almost all of that song, except for that super intricate melody, is just all based off of da da. You know, the bass line, you know, that little beep, boop, 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 you know, it's all just working through permutations of that, whether we're in 5 or 6 or 9. So I think that's where it started. And, you know, that's one of the earlier Kneebody tunes that we've just played. We've played that tune a lot. And it's still really challenging for us. And I do remember specifically that solo section was the hardest thing for us, and we shedded a lot. And honestly, most of the history of Kneebody has been us trying to catch up to Nate, basically, to be honest, you know. So like that tune, I remember we would get into these practice sessions where basically the goal was, can we hold down those different permutations of the 9? So either the dugout, 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 or the other one that it implies, which is like, you know, like dugout, 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 you know. And we would do games where basically Nate would play like really, really clear, polite time to kind of help us ground. And then as soon as we were solid, then he would actually try and get to like derail us, basically. And that was like our way of doing resistance training over that section. But you know, it's one of those tunes, it's one of those sections that it can imply a lot of different permutations, and that's the fun of it, but also the part that makes it so hard, you know. So when we're doing the longer notes over that section, you can imply you can imply other meters because it's long notes and they're all evenly displaced. And then even the dagat, 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 you know, which he has been known to do, you know. So, but yeah, that one, like you were asking earlier about like making beats and whatnot. That one, by the time we got to that song, Nate and I had done a lot of albums and projects together, and so he kind of maybe at that point he kind of knew my formula, let's say, you know. So that one he was able to really extrapolate a great clave from the bass line, and then kind of knew that wouldn't be enough for me, and then added layers that kind of smeared that.
In which part of the song are you talking about?
I mean, any of the sections, honestly. You know, I really love, in drum beats, I really love beats that have like a few different tiers happening at once, that have like a micro beat to beat subdivision happening, then maybe a bar to bar, and then maybe like a 2 to 4 bar idea. Like I love that sound of the micro, medium, and macro feeling. So you get that feeling of like the big beat, because this song, This song is like, it's very notey and it's very subdivided. And so you get that, and then you get this like larger beat feeling that's kind of anchoring that information.
Are you talking about fractalized? So
Yeah.
like, let's see. Let's see. You know what I'm trying to do?
I don't know. Yeah,
So it's like minute 5, slightly larger 5, big 5 over
exactly.
the top of it. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah, I just love that sound, you know. And then the different ways you can express that sound, right? So you know, I practice that a lot on the horn or just using voice and hand, you know, but then yeah, when I'm thinking about drum beats, I'm also thinking about that kind of stuff.
When you say practice, would it be like you're driving and you're just going like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5?
Yeah.
Like that's everything?
Yeah, kind of like, you know, if it was like I'm thinking of a rhythm, you know, like in all those years of touring with Tigran, like a rhythm that appears a lot in his music because it's so useful for like blurring lines between implied meters is like if you're in 5, it's the 2-1-2 rhythm. Da da ga da da ga da da ga da da ga. You
Yeah,
know?
the less common of the two
Totally.
5/16 varietals. Yeah.
Totally, exactly. Because then you can take that da da ga da da ga da, and you can just like roll with that. I mean, a la also people like Ari Honig and whatever. So it's like, you know, and same with 7, like 3-1-3. You know, so yeah, I'll practice stuff like if it was that, you know, the really extreme practice of it, yeah, it would be like da. You know, da ga da da ga da 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 ga 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 da ga da 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 da ga, you know, and on and on and on, you know. So just taking that concept and then maybe not in a super rigid way, but just applying that concept to beats.
You know where I hear that actually, and this is a digression from Drum Battle.
Please.
But in the bass line for the song Frame, right?
Yeah,
Boom, 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 boom.
totally.
Yeah.
Perfect example. Yeah, totally.
So what was it like having, like conceptualizing this as a composer and then giving it to Nate and having it be interpreted? Because you said earlier that the part of the struggle was kind of keeping up with Nate. When this was on the computer or the easel or wherever you write,
Yeah.
were you already thinking ahead to like what it would probably be?
Man, no.
Oh.
Or, yeah, I mean, I mostly, without fail, I mostly write 2 projects or 2 people. So, yeah. I think when I was writing this, that, you know, I've kind of had a little bit of a Jekyll and Hyde musical life because I've got Kneebody, and then I've got my own career and writing for my own career. So, yeah, there's always been this funny thread where I'll be writing the song and I'll be like, oh, this could be a good Kneebody song. You know, there's a couple tunes that somehow have actually worked in my world, which is, you know, let's say the more acoustic side versus the electroacoustic of Kneebody. But that one, I remember when I was writing it, I was like, this is clearly going to be a Kneebody tune. So in a way, as I'm writing it, I can already hear what the musicians are going to be doing. And I kind of intimately know what they're capable of. So I guess sort of, you know, to answer your question, you know, yeah, I imagine I was already kind of hearing the possibility of what they would do with it, and specifically Nate.
Interesting. Another thing that I think about, and it's funny you mentioned your love of hip hop, because one thing that I really like about some of my favorite hip hop artists is the intersection of rhythm and harmony.
Yeah.
So just for instance, like there are some modern like trap or drill rap beats where like the flows might be amazing, but if there isn't anything interesting happening harmonically, like just to my ear, it's missing a layer, or it's missing potential. And I feel like part of what's happening writ large with Kneebody. Like part of the reason Kneebody pokes out of the tapestry for me is it's like simultaneously it's simultaneously like musicians' music, but also accessible to the general public. Does that make sense? And I feel like I could play this for my dad, and I have. I've gifted him a couple of Kneebody CDs over the years, and like he appreciates it immediately, just because of the vibe. But there's some music that, like, just for instance, if I ask Spotify to play like a easy listening fusion playlist for my dog or something that has that surface level ambience, but that doesn't go any deeper than that. But the cool thing about your stuff and the cool thing about Kneebody is that it also satisfies on that deeper level with sort of like counterintuitive harmonies. So if I think about drum battle, like if it were just a minor seventh chord or just like conventional harmonic relationships, like that would be cool. But some part of the itch is scratched more when there are just like counterintuitive harmonies and just like sick voicings a la Adam Benjamin. Like, do you think about that consciously as well? Do you have a personality facet where like cool rhythms, okay, like Drake mildly interested meme, but add some kind of sick counterintuitive harmony or like a really emotional chord progression that either satisfies your expectations or surprises you, like that adds an extra gear even as like a listener?
Yeah, man, it's so hard to answer that question. Yeah, ultimately, it's, first of all, thank you for what you're saying. It's very kind, like from our perspective, specifically Kneebody, like we're grateful for anybody that loves the music and connects to it. I mean, we think of it as pretty weird music, so but I guess where I'm heading with that is just like, that's, again, like I think we're musicians that got together, became friends, have similar loves of music, and kind of crossed together in this particular way, where we were able to collaborate and create a sound that aesthetically spoke to us. And that whole thing of like taste, of like what we find cheesy or not cheesy, or like, oh well, that's kind of typical, that's been done, or that's not been done. That's all just feel intuitive stuff, and God knows why. That would be hard to explain. Why did we choose that or choose that? But it's just an instinctual thing that just places us in a particular place, and then resonates with a particular tribe of people that like the music. So, but I would say honestly, most of it was not deliberate or conscious. I'm not sure if that's specifically kind of where you're heading with that, but it's kind of nice to know. Maybe another way I would answer that is just like within any context, it's kind of nice to know where you stand, and then you choose to align with where you stand, or maybe you step a little bit to the left or to the right because there's just something about that just feels right to you, And I feel like you can take that analogy and you can kind of apply it in very pragmatic and literal ways. So like, we're hanging today and we're talking about drum beats, and I'm talking about taking beats where the core clave is maybe something that's actually very typical, and then we're just adding this one little thing that just kind of makes it kind of slanted in a particular way. And I feel like that's taste and aesthetic is just like that.
Yeah, it's almost like we were talking about cocktails earlier in the coffee shop.
Yeah.
But I didn't even know that there were like bullshit New York cocktails until I went to a dinner where somebody made a reservation at one of these sort of Times Square bars. And yeah, I ordered a Manhattan, and I'm like, this is hot trash. Like, this isn't a Manhattan. And it looks like a Manhattan, and it's just like overly sweet, and it's just all well liquor. And then like you go to a good bartender, and they're like mixing everything by hand, and like all the proportions are right, and they've like hand distilled their simple syrup and all that stuff. And I feel like that's a good analogy for this, where to me, Kneebody is music where somebody cared enough to not just do the cliche thing, but to tweak it a little bit, not because you were trying to make it cool, but just for the love of tinkering. And I think that shows. Yeah, it's like all those little pixels add up to a gestalt of like, wow.
Yeah, and again, ultimately, it's hopefully in an ideal world when you're making these kind of choices, you're making them, like you said earlier, it's an instinctual choice. You're just searching for that feeling of why we create and why we're on the artist path, which is just to get that strange, satisfying, grounding, joyful feeling of doing something where you're like, I think this just resonates with me in a particular way, and it's because of the choices I'm making, And the choices we're making we're all drawing from the same bowl of food, So, but yeah, thanks, Nate. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, well, I think that's a great note to end it on. This has been a pleasure. It's been a lot of fun to play a lot of these tunes that I've shed for the last decade with the man himself. So
oh man,
glad we're able to do this.
Yeah, thanks for allowing me to stumble on piano and relearn these tunes. Yeah, thank you, Nate.